As you watch my videos, you'll hear plenty of true stories with a twist of local folklore. But tonight's story, this one's different. It's not a ghost story, not a legend, not a campfire tale. This one is absolutely true, and man, it rocked Lincoln. It's the story of a well, a missing man, a respected rancher, a 5-year secret buried under boards and dirt, and a discovery so shocking that people line the streets to come and watch the wagon. So settle in and let's head back to the early days of Lincoln when roads were dusty, the buildings were new, and one man's disappearance turned into one of the strangest, most sensational cases that Placer County ever saw. The year was 1859, the same year Lincoln was founded. The railroad was coming through, a few houses were popping up, and the town was still young enough that everyone knew each other. That year, 2 friends arrived from Wisconsin, Ambrose Niles and James Singleton. Niles was the kind of man who made a really good impression, solid, reliable, hardworking, and ambitious. He settled about 4 miles west of the new town and slowly built up a respectable ranching operation. People trusted him. He earned a reputation as a model citizen. Singleton was different, right? He was quiet, friendly, always willing to lend a hand, but was known for being a little careful with his money. Some might even say stingy, but most folks would just say they saw him as practical. So he worked for wages, saved what he earned, and rarely spent a dime he didn't have to. But here's the important part. So Singleton occasionally loaned money out, and one of the people that he loaned money to was Ambrose Niles. Even back then, a debt had a way of tying 2 lives together, longer than either person even expected, really. So after a few years in Lincoln, Singleton did something that, would become his habit, and he left. The early 1870s, he went to Nevada. Later he came back, left again for Sacramento, and then again for Oakland. But Thanksgiving of 1876, something changed. Singleton returned to Lincoln one more time, and this time he told people that he was planning to stay at well. He greeted old friends in town, he told them he'd come visit soon, and he promised he'd stop by to catch up. And even, hang out for a little bit, catch up. So, but first he told them he needed to go out and see Ambrose Niles. Niles still owed him money, and Singleton wanted to settle up the account. So to get there, he hopped onto Fuller's wagon. A neighbor headed past Niles' ranch. Singleton waved and smiled and rode off. No one knew at the time, but that was the last moment anyone in Lincoln would ever see him alive alone. The very next day, people spotted something interesting. Niles and Singleton together riding in Niles' wagon in Sheridan. They weren't arguing. They didn't seem upset. Just 2 men going about their day, So, and that was it. That was the final sighting of James Singleton, right? So, well, at least the side of the lawn, that is. But days passed, then weeks, then months. Friends started asking Niles, where's James? He said he was coming out to see me. Niles always had a story, all perfectly reasonable. James must have left the country. He probably decided to move on again. How he was, never stayed in one place long. So, and honestly, it made sense, right? So Singleton did drift from town to town. Nobody thought too much of it. It was just how he was. But then little things started feeling off, right? People noticed Niles was wearing a watch that looked a whole lot like Singleton's. Niles said Singleton gave it to one of his children, right? A nice gesture, huh? So, except Singleton wasn't known for giving away valuable things, and especially not to people who already owe him money. So, right after Singleton left town, Niles filled in his well. That's pretty suspicious if you ask me. So now in the 1870s, nobody filled in a perfectly good well unless there was a very good reason. It was difficult, it was expensive, and it made no sense. But Niles said, the well was no good anymore, dry, unusable. People talked, not loudly, but they talked. Years passed, life went on. Niles continued building his reputation, solid citizen, good neighbor, trustworthy rancher. But in 1880, he suddenly sold his ranch and moved away. And that old filled-in well, it still bothered people. Not one person, but almost everyone who ever knew Singleton. Something about that well just didn't sit right, and rumors had been flying around for years. So they came to the moment that blew the whole thing open. So one of Singleton's friends was in Sacramento on business, and he decided to ask around about Ambrose Niles. And what he found sent a chill through him, right? You see, Niles had negotiated payment of promissory notes that belonged to Singleton and collected a debt in Singleton's name. So a man who's supposedly long gone and had a note handled by the man who supposedly waved him goodbye. So that friend rushed back to Lincoln, and he gathered a digging crew together, and they marched out to Niles' old property to open up the well. And, that had been filled in for like 5 years. So the dig took hours, backbreaking work, layer after layer of dirt, rock, and debris. Then they struck wood, like a wooden, platform down there, a false floor. But they pulled up the boards and they didn't find anything. So people relaxed a little bit. Maybe Singleton really had left the country, but, and maybe everyone had made a big fuss over nothing. But something about that floor felt wrong. And, 2 planks were kind of bowed upward, as if something below had been pushing against them a long time ago and then stopped. It has to make you wonder, was he buried alive? I don't know. But according to the museum, the bowed boards are true. It's so twisted, and, that I had to double check. So someone said, hey, let's keep going. And they did. They dug deeper. The well dropped down further, actually much further than they thought. And then the second wooden floor appeared, and they peeled away the boards, and immediately, before they even saw the face, before anyone said a word, they saw his shoes. Singleton's shoes, perfectly preserved. The well kept everything exactly as it was, the clothing, the body, everything. So 5 years underground and still instantly recognizable. They lifted Singleton's remains out of the well and carried them towards town. Somebody went ahead and spread the word, and by the time the wagon reached Lincoln, crowds lined the streets. People gasped, some wept, some whispered that they always knew something wasn't right. But now they had proof. By this time, Niles was no longer in Lincoln. He was working as a traveling salesman based out of Sacramento. Constables were sent to arrest him, and, they missed him in Sacramento and tracked him through the valley and finally caught up with him near Wheatland. They told him that, why they were there, about the well, about the body, about the shoes. And Ambrose Niles, a respected rancher, solid citizen, the man everyone thought they knew, broke down immediately. He confessed. Well, he confessed to the part of it, right? Niles admitted that he buried Singleton in the well. He didn't deny that at all. He didn't fight it. He did claim ignorance, right? He said very plainly, yes, I put him there. But, then he gave the story, he insisted was true, but it didn't make any sense, right? He said that he and Singleton were riding together in the wagon when the horses suddenly bolted. In the chaos, Singleton fell out, the wagon wheel ran him over and crushed his skull, killing him instantly. Niles said he panicked and, he was sure nobody would believe him, especially because he owed Singleton money. So he insisted of reporting instead of reporting the accident, he hid the body. He buried him, built a false floor, covered the well, and he lived with the secret for 5 years until the truth finally clawed its way back into the daylight. What was his, explanation true? That depends on who you ask. Niles was indicted for murder. His confession didn't clear him. It just raised more questions. And if it was an accident, why fill in the well so thoroughly? Why build 2 floors? Why keep Singleton's watch? Why negotiate a financial papers? Why tell so many shifting stories? And if it were truly an accident, it was handled with more secrecy and more fear than most murders. So people in Lincoln didn't know what to believe. Some said Niles, had snapped at the idea of their debt argument, and some said it was premeditated. Some claimed Niles owed more money. So, and some that people believe Niles' story. At that moment of panic, it turned into years of guilt and it never escaped. So what makes this story so powerful isn't just the mystery of how fiercely community refused to let Singleton vanish. They remembered him, they talked about him, they questioned Niles, they worried about that filled-in well. They dug for him. They dug for him with their own hands, and they found him. Most frontier disappearances never got answers. Most bodies never came home. Most mysteries never made it past rumor. But this one did, because Lincoln didn't let it go. Singleton was finally laid to rest in the Lincoln Oddfellows Cemetery. Now that that we've walked through the story, let's separate fact from invention, because this case barely needs any embellishment. So, what's true? Niles and Singleton arrived together in 1859. Niles owed Singleton money. Singleton returned to 1876 to collect. Singleton was last seen with Niles in Sheridan. Niles filled in his well immediately after. Suspicion simmered for years. A friend discovered Niles had handled Singleton's financial notes. Townspeople dug out the well. Singleton's preserved body was found under 2 false floors. Niles broke down to confess to burying him. Niles confessed or claimed it was an accident. He was indicted for murder. Singleton was buried in the IOF cemetery. So what part about this is legend, or what is legend about it all? Ghost or hauntings, there's none recorded. The idea of Singleton was killed for wealth was not supported by records. Claims of revenge killing, that's just a legend. Where does truth meet mystery, right? Niles confessed to burying the body, but insisted he didn't commit the murder. And while accidents did happen in those days, false floors, the secrecy, the money trail, and the years of shifting explanations make the truth hard to follow. Was it murder? Was it panic? Was it fear? The jury of history never reached a final answer, but Singleton's friends and at the Lincoln Museum made sure his story didn't stay buried. Before we wrap this up, I want to give a huge shout out to the Lincoln Area Archives Museum. These incredible folks keep our town's history alive. Every map, every newspaper clipping, every folder packed with stories just like this one. If you've never been out there, you're missing out. So it's one of the friendliest little museums you'll ever step into, and it's absolutely packed with Lincoln's hidden history. The kind of stuff you won't find on the internet. You just gotta go and look. They're open to the public, and volunteers are fantastic, and honestly, they deserve way more foot traffic than they get, considering it's totally free. So the next time you're downtown, swing by Bierman's Plaza. It's right there. Say hello and poke around a bit. Thanks for watching another Strange Stories in Lincoln, guys. Keep your eye out for the next episode. If you like this one, share it on YouTube with somebody who cares about our town or simply likes storytelling. As always, I'm Mike Crossfield, a local business owner trying to make a better Lincoln together. Thank you very much. Good night.